Welcome to the Health Edge, translating the science of self-care. I'm Mark Pettis with my friend, colleague, John Bagnulo. John, good morning, my friend.
Good morning, Mark, and hey, in advance, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. We're recording this on New Year's Eve, and 2026 is bound to be another eventful year, and more science, more insights, and undoubtedly a lot more fun topics to discuss as we look ahead, John. But always a joy to connect. And we have another great topic today that I think is become more popular in the sort of wellness, functional integrative health circles, John, around uric acid and the importance of uric acid as an epidemiologic trend where we see great increases in uric acid. We appreciate it as a biomarker for metabolic health and all that encompasses metabolic health, from insulin resistance to hypertension to gout and to all chronic complex diseases, where clearly high uric acid is a biomarker that suggests great risk.
Mm, mm.
And of course, like most of the things we discuss, we can look at the changes and trends in the standard American diet and sort of the modern lifestyle as major drivers of these trends. And then perhaps most importantly, there are so many things that a person can do to better manage uric acid and as a consequence, improve their metabolic health, their health span or quality of life. And I think we will see more research in the longevity and aging literature as well in terms of accelerated aging. So it's a great topic, John. I do want to, if it's okay, John, bring
Yeah.
to our listeners' attention. You've got a great Substack blog,
Oh,
and
thanks. Yeah.
which I was recently looking at your overview of this topic, which is just superb,
Oh,
John.
thanks.
Everything that you do, you have a great way of translating in writing that which you do so beautifully well in your teaching. And not, in my experience, not a lot of folks can translate in that way. So, uh,
Thank you. I appreciate that, Mark. I really enjoy it, and so much of this, so much of this is the culmination of working with you for so many years. So, thank you. Right back at you.
great stuff. And if people are looking for a really fine, objective, well studied subject review, please check out John's Substack. And I think it's just John Bagnulo, right? If they're on Substack,
I, I,
that's
yeah, that sounds right. I think so.
that's an easy one to remember. I'm going to pull up some slides, John, that we've
Yeah.
put together
Perfect.
here that can help guide this discussion. And again, I apologize for those who are listening and unable to see these, but I'll make sure these are on our website, and hopefully you're seeing that okay, John.
Yeah. Perfect.
And I'll have the slide deck available on our website, and this, of course, can be seen on our YouTube channel as well. And just some high-level bullet points as we go through this. Uric acid is rising. These are blood levels of uric acid dramatically in America and around the world. And that trends very significantly with what you see epidemiologically in terms of insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome as characterized by insulin resistance, hypertension, large waistlines with visceral fat and fatty liver. We're appreciating this more in degenerative neurologic diseases, in particular Alzheimer's, which is getting a lot of interest. Mental health, many people don't realize that
Yeah.
poor metabolic health is highly associated with major depression, bipolar disease, post-traumatic stress, OCD. This, I think, is an enormous area of opportunity when you look at sort of metabolic psychiatry, if you will. And we know that quality of life, of course, and aging can be accelerated in in disrupted metabolic health where uric acid is often very, very high.
Yeah.
And as we'll point out, this is another, I think, great example, John, of the importance of looking at the epidemic of chronic complex diseases as a consequence of these growing gene environment mismatches. There was a time where having a high uric acid might have been an evolutionary advantage.
Yeah.
In a modern context, that is less the case. And as we'll point out, you begin to see the usual suspects, right, John? It's the high sugar intake, high glycemic carbs, processed carbs, these carbohydrate dense grains, fructose, largely from sugar, but also from fructose syrup and high fructose concentrated sweeteners, alcohol, and in just a huge topic that we were talking about offline, and one that we'll dive into a bit more in the near future, is inability to alkalinize the metabolic environment as a consequence of the standard American diet. And then, as we alluded to, there are just many, many things that we can do to improve this, and we will close with that. It seemed like a good.
Yeah. I mean, the point, Mark, that you raise here is that this is in many ways, even though hyperuricemia, having, a uric acid level greater than 7 millimoles here per liter, even though that might not be looked at by many healthcare providers as a disease or a condition, when you look at the effects of it, like you just pointed out, and how it's tied into insulin resistance and really the metabolic syndrome, you would say it's a pandemic given the prevalence of this now globally. I mean, the numbers are really just unbelievable. And what I think make those numbers even more profound in terms of the rates of this as an issue, having high uric acid levels, what I think really stands out is that most people who have hyperuricemia, they're asymptomatic other than the metabolic issues, right? Which everything gets blamed on. Well, your blood sugar levels are okay. We're going to focus on carbohydrate management, which is a big part of this. Don't get me wrong, but that's not it. That's not the only thing that can really correct hyperuricemia. It's how can you help a patient excrete more of this acid? How can you help them with the metabolism of it? And can you make even better choices within the carbohydrate world? We know certain carbohydrates are, you pointed those out. It's not about counting carbs with hyperuricemia. That might get you part of the way there, but it's about certain types of carbohydrates, especially when they're presented to the liver in combination with other things like whether it's alcohol or polyunsaturated fat. So I think it's a really fascinating story that it's a global issue. And like you said, it really illustrates how you could say this about you more than anybody could say this about the renal system. And we can say this about the hepatobiliary or the liver in general. In a lot of ways, it's like the canary in the coal mine, right? These organ systems, they give us signs that there's an imbalance. They give us signs that the body is compensating around the clock for that discord between how our ancestors ate and how we ate. And for what we have this blueprint to metabolize certain foods in levels, and sometimes those go awry, and it prepares us for, like you said earlier, a 3-week shortage of food. So we're going to store, right? We're going to store fat at an accelerated rate. But when we live in the world we do now, the liver can't compensate for some of these imbalances around the clock without it taking its toll. And I think uric acid really tells us that story. So I think it's a great way to start. I mean, look at the global rates, look at all the imbalances that the liver is faced with, and how it has to adapt to the point of fructose. Fructose isn't like glucose in terms of what the liver can do with it. It has to add a phosphorus molecule to it. So when it does that, it's generating uric acid in that situation alone. And then if you already have a high acid burden on the body, it becomes even more difficult to excrete that acid. So it's a fascinating topic. And I love that intro that you provided. That's great, giving us the background of that and showing the all the different contributing factors to this.
And we will. This is an article that is a very nice review published last year that looks at the sort of global epidemic of high uric acid and the implication of that. I'll make this, it's an open source article. I'll make this available on our healthedgepodcast.com website. And some of the slides that we're going to share here, I just wanted to bring this up to our listeners, John, is some research done by, in my view, one of the really fine researcher clinicians in the U.S., Dr. Richard Johnson, who's a nephrologist. He's at the University of Colorado and bridges the lab to the bedside, the bench to the bedside in ways that very few physicians can these days. And I think his work is innovative and I would even say revolutionary. Anyone who wants a good review of this can find it in his last book, Nature Wants Us to Be Fat. And we'll look very briefly at that mechanism, what he in a prior book referred to as the fat switch. And that switch, unfortunately, is on for most humans that live on this planet at this time. And from that article that we just shared, this is just a look at the number of articles looking at uric acid and the extent to which hyperuricemia has become epidemic around the world. And we won't get into the detail of what's on this slide, but there's historically, there have been medications available to lower uric acid, but very, I think, limited insight in terms of what the drivers of this epidemic actually are. And, for the nephrologist, this is a fun slide. For most people, this is probably going to cause a migraine. But the high level point of this is that we have systems that ordinarily allow us to balance uric acid levels, the amount we produce in our bodies, and the extent to which we can excrete what we produce when that production becomes excessive. And we know that about a third of uric acid is excreted in our intestinal tract. And about 2/3 are excreted by the kidneys. And these are just various proteins that enable that excretion in the gut and in the kidneys. And the importance of this is that this is a very sophisticated system that allows us to generally handle high uric acid production. Some people might have, a genetic predisposition because these systems aren't working quite as well. But like many complex modern metabolic disorders, this is largely a lifestyle issue. And these are medications that have been around a long time. I've prescribed these often that can enhance excretion in the kidney. And many people might also be familiar with allopurinol, which inhibits the production of uric acid. So there are good pharmacologic approaches, but who wants to have to rely on that if they can otherwise get to the root cause and mitigate that production excretion imbalance? And this, for me, I think, is one of the fundamental aspects for people to think about, John. And that's this mutation, this uricase that humans have lost the function of this enzyme, this protein uricase, which ordinarily breaks down uric acid, preventing those levels from getting too high. And I'll let you comment on this, John, but what we know is that uric acid probably for many species had a survival advantage, and when uric acid was high in times of food scarcity, it really promoted fat storage. This is the fat switch that Richard Johnson refers to. At times of deprivation, as uric acid went up, and often fructose from available fruits was around, that mammal could consume it. It would store more fat in anticipation of a long winter of deprivation, and that was a survival advantage. But in modern life, that genetic adaptation now becomes maladaptive because that period of deprivation, sort of saving for a rainy day, that rainy day doesn't exist anymore. We just have calories that are abundant, generally of poor quality, and readily available.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have that example in terms of survival because of the effects of elevated uric acid really promoting more, fat deposition and storage, but also, there's examples of where mammals can hibernate because they, gorge on fructose-rich fruits, right, in the autumn or the fall before a long winter, and they're able to, kind of store massive amounts of body fat and then go into that hibernation state. So it's a metabolic switch, like many hormones are, and this isn't a hormone as an enzyme though, but it's a metabolic switch that I think really depicts the effects of chronic fructose consumption when you look at the role that it plays in that, what we do, right? What we do with the carbohydrates we eat. I think that's a big part of it, really. It's just and I think fructose is high on the radar because of what we know about it. And it's unfortunate because I think for the average person, if they know anything about uric acid or they know anything about gout, they've learned, unfortunately, that it's all about purines and purine metabolism, and you should stay away from things like hard cheeses and sardines. But let's be clear, of the 25 million people in North America that have hyperuricemia, sardines and hard cheeses are not responsible, right? You could say that high purine alcoholic beverages like beer, for instance, could be a contributing factor, but fructose should take center stage. So, all right, it can become the perfect storm. And then if you put like a high purine load on top of it, yeah, it's only going to get worse. But to learn that gout, which, again, we're going back 50 or 60 years, to learn that gout is a disease of excess animal protein is just really misleading. And I think that's what's been portrayed, right?
Yeah, that's what I and most of my colleagues have been saying and continue to say for the last few generations, John. It's a very parochial view of what's really going on. And when you look at this story, this sort of fat switch story, and again, I'm just going to read this, the evolutionary importance of uricase in humans centers on its role in that purine metabolism. Purine is like what's in DNA. So animal protein sources are much higher in sort of DNA purine content. And when we lost that uricase activity through evolution, these higher uric acid levels provided a survival edge because it induced insulin resistance. It induced metabolic syndrome for that anticipated seasonal environmental challenge. And food scarcity was you could navigate that by virtue of this metabolic signaling by enhancing fat storage largely from fructose, because those were the available food
Yeah.
sources. Now this contributes to obesity, gout. This thrifty gene adaptation, right? This being genetically predisposed to store for the rainy day now has become a huge driver of metabolic syndrome and poor health because that rainy day doesn't exist, right? This thrift trait now has led to fat synthesis year round. And we know that, as you just pointed out, John, this is really more an issue of sugar, which is the greatest source of fructose in our diet. What otherwise was a survival edge has now become maladaptive. And this thrifty gene hypothesis, for those who are interested in the sort of the history of this, it's interesting. This is some of the original research, and the Dr. James Neal conceived this concept of the thrifty gene in his study of indigenous tribes around the world in South America. And so it's important to keep this in mind. Our modern environments are not well suited to the evolutionary biologic mandate that is alive and well in our DNA, in our book of life. And so this energy storage, right, which we would now call fat, obesity, visceral fat, these higher uric acid levels just make fat storage more easy, and the ability to burn fat much more challenging. And we know that other things contribute to this as well, particularly stress, which is sort of epidemic in our environment. And again, uric acid, which has benefits, exerts those benefits when the levels are much lower than what we typically see. So like so much in human biology, right, John? Not like uric acid is bad. It's a matter of the homeostasis, the balance of production and excretion, which once disrupted, those benefits tend to be lost.
Yeah, I like that you point out the fact that uric acid does have antioxidant properties. So it's the dose that makes the poison, right?
Exactly.
It's the dose. And I think modest amounts can really offer the body benefits. But when you cross that threshold, it starts to really, again, for the modern human, having a uric acid level of 4 or 4.5, there might be some upside to that as opposed to having it at a 1 or a 1.5. But when you cross that 7, things really start to go downhill fast. And fruit in evolution, I like how you mentioned cooling temperatures around the globe. The Ice Age brought about the need for a lot of these mechanisms, and I think that's about the time the enzyme disappears.
Exactly. When you start losing fructose in your environment because fruit producing plants can no longer produce that's sort of the genius of our ability to adapt as organisms. And this is just another sort of graphic, a few slides that from Dr. Richard Johnson. Less fruit available and during these ice ages, the last of which was probably 10, 11,000 BC. This uricase mutation then allows humans to store more fat, just to more likely survive these long winter seasons of deprivation. And so it's a really nice graphical representation of that. And fructose is, as you pointed out, John, I think this is really the point of emphasis. It does appear to be the primary trigger. And again, a lot of this comes from Dr. Johnson, Robert Lustig, out at UCSF. There have been some really great clinical researchers here that have shed light on the devastating effects of sugar and by extension fructose from sugar in our modern food supplies. And so fructose, and you pointed this out, John, at the outset, unlike glucose helps produce energy, fructose actually depletes energy because of
Right.
its requirement of phosphate. So it withdraws from the energy savings account. One can quickly get depletion of one's
Yeah.
savings account. And we know that this has very significant effects on the mitochondria. This mitochondrial function becomes impaired. And as uric acid goes up, you see more oxidative stress within the mitochondria. And as we always talk about, John, I think mitochondrial disruption, may be one of the great bullseyes on the target of chronic
Central.
complex
Yeah.
disease. And so you see these mechanisms very much tying to Alzheimer's, to degenerative neurologic diseases, type 2 diabetes as a mitochondrial disease, cardiovascular disease, congestive heart failure, chronic pain, right? And on that list goes. So the mechanisms here are really fascinating and very much aligned with those models. And then, of course, when one is depleting their energy, the body's well designed to become more hungry. It'll lower, your metabolic rate will drop because your body wants to conserve. And so it's really hard to override these signals. If you're trying to lose weight and you're consuming a lot of sugar, fructose, and you're chronically stressed, not moving very much,
Yeah.
all of those ways of more effectively adapting become lost, and one finds themselves on this slippery slide. And it's, as we well know, really hard to get off that slippery slide unless you begin to think differently about what's really going on.
Yeah. And I mean, if you look at these four mechanisms involved, just to add, you mentioned Robert Lustig, who I know, again, and I love Richard Johnson's work. I appreciate you, highlighting those books and sharing that with me earlier this year. But Lustig has found that when you get beyond somewhere for an average adult, when you get beyond 25 grams of fructose for the day, these things start to happen. So you start to shunt energy production away from the mitochondria. So we start burning less fat when you cross that threshold of 25 grams of fructose. So we start to get more anabolic overall as an organism, right? Storage, prepare for the shortage. And to your point, mitochondrial health and the mitochondrial ability to contribute the majority of our energy, that's central. I mean, that's central to this conversation. And so I just think that quantity is so, boy, in today's foods, with today's food choices that most people make, 25 grams happens at a meal, not at a day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's such a great point, John. And I laugh because you've been saying this for as long as I've known you, which is many, many, many years, and yet it's still not mainstream thinking for the most part. When you look at this, right, pretty much all that we've touched on. This is just a bit of a summary, but you see very significant oxidative stress, right? Diminished energy production. I mean, who out there isn't tired? Doesn't have the energy to really thrive during the day, just completing activities of daily living, let alone creating, exercising, playing with your kids and grandkids. Fatty liver, which, as we've talked about in prior recordings, is an epidemic. 25, 30%. We're seeing it in young children. And then, of course, inflammation, one of the great drivers of aging and all diseases. These are all linked, right? It's the perfect storm. And then, of course, the brain effects, I think, can't be can't be overstated, John.
Yeah.
Even today, mental health disease is like a separate bucket, this sort of elusive black box of things that we call depression and bipolar
Mm.
disease, OCD. These, I think,
Many of which are metabolic, right?
these are metabolic disorders,
Yeah.
and I think these are fields that need dramatic transformation in terms
Yeah.
of the paradigms that guide how they think and ultimately how one responds. A serotonin uptake inhibitor, worthy though it may be for some people who are in
It's a
free fall,
Band-Aid. Yeah. It's just a
is
Band-Aid. Yeah.
a band-aid, and is in no way addressing really what's actually
Yeah.
going on. Uh, and this is another sort of summary slide from Ishimoto's research several years ago, again, just showing that this fructose, and again, largely from sugar, and I think that's, we can't overemphasize that sugar is the greatest source of fructose in the American diet. And when you add fruits that are now available year round, that historically were only available seasonally, we talk about eating locally and seasonally, and you can get, hybridized sugar, fructose rich fruits now that are more abundant and readily available than ever. Obviously, high fructose corn syrup, but the metabolic storm, the mitochondrial effects, poor oral health, um, leptin resistance, right? Fructose, as it depletes energy, you don't have the satiety signal will not work under those circumstances, because once
Yeah.
your brain perceives insufficient energy, even if you're getting more than abundant calories from empty nutritional food sources, your leptin will not work. You will be hungry all the time. You will not move much. Robert Ludwig, another great researcher at the Brigham and
Yeah.
Women's, done a lot of this work in children. He's a pediatric endocrinologist at the Brigham and Women's Hospital. These guys, in my view, are heroes in this realm of research and bringing the research, applying it, translating it in a way that very much disrupts what has been the consensus thinking about calories in, calories out. Doesn't matter what the quality of that calorie is.
It's amazing that still persists, though, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean, to me, that's incredible.
yeah,
That's like believing the world is flat. It's the same. It's at the same level for me.
exactly. No question. And
Yeah.
you see just how painfully difficult it is to change consensus thinking. That's a whole
Yeah.
other sort of
It really is. Yeah.
psychological phenomenon, and it unintentionally or maybe intentionally hurts a lot of people, because it. And I have to say, I've been steeped in academia, as I know you have, John, through the
Sure.
years.
Sure.
Um, Academia will be one of the more refractory institutions to change,
Yeah.
and sadly, one cannot look to those expert institutional opinions as reflecting what might be the vanguard science, and that's a discussion for another day.
That it is. Yeah.
But again, we know these will all contribute to the fat switch, right? Fructose from sugar, from these high glycemic carbs. Um, uh, Richard Johnson's research, which I think is particularly interesting in that it adds this additional sort of contributor, and that is sodium and dehydration. The extent to which many people just get too much sodium in the processed standard American diet, often not enough water, and it's that higher concentration of sodium, that or osmolality, that concentration of the blood osmolality, that actually enhances fructose production, and so hydration becomes very important in this equation. And then we touched briefly on alcohol and umami, these savory meats and shellfish, beer. Those can certainly activate uric acid production. I would say alcohol is really important just in general from an epidemiologic and health perspective. But as you pointed out, John, these foods rich in purines are hardly the main issue. It's when you're consuming those in the absence of more alkaline foods and greens and more sort of plant-based, non-grain foods.
Yeah, and that's beautiful, Mark, that you weave that in, because all of these things can essentially be buffered to some extent by providing the body with more potassium, more calcium, more magnesium, which in chemistry is you're giving the body a greater load of alkaline, right? Alkaline potential substances, things that the body can essentially buffer out not only uric acid, but other acid loads, right? And then it helps compensate for whether it's the high sodium content of the diet, you're able to eliminate that much more freely. You're able to mobilize fluid, thereby, reducing its effect on blood pressure. But at the same time, you're able to clear or excrete more of this uric acid. And so, what I love that you just said is that our ancestors had that alkaline load. It was built in because they weren't eating grains on top of the animal protein. We need the animal protein. We need the nutrients in the animal protein. We need the quality of that protein to maintain lean body mass. And surprising to many, we actually need that animal protein to maintain good bone density. But we need that in conjunction with a much more pH balanced overall diet, right? And we don't get that because people now rely on grains and animal protein, sometimes far, far greater acid loads from the grains and all the cereal products in their diet than the animal protein, which people are, again, surprised to hear that. They don't realize that the net acid load placed on the body, and we can talk about this in much greater detail later, but it becomes the perfect storm because unlike the Yanamomo that you saw Dr. Neal studying in one of your earlier slides, and unlike the Papua New Guinea, the Highlanders there who are on a chronic, very, very low renal acid load because of all the root vegetables on top of the greens that they're consuming. We're having all of this fructose and all of this high sodium loads. We're having that on top of a very, very high potential renal acid load, unlike anything human physiology has ever had to deal with over the course of our history. And so the fructose on top of that, the uric acid on top of that, it's just insurmountable, right? And it's amazing to me, and I think you could say the same with your unbelievable background and in renal, in all of the ways that the renal system compensates for the human body's misgivings here. To me, Mark, what's fascinating about this, it's amazing that people are able to walk around and be as functional as they are and in a decent state of health, given all of these discords with our metabolic capacity for some of these things, right? So to think that someone can have, 50, 60, 75 grams of fructose on top of an acid-loaded diet, right? And to have all of that placed on the liver and on the kidneys and yet still have minimal symptoms other than metabolic syndrome, it's remarkable. And I'm saying this in complete sincerity. It's remarkable that people are as functional as they are given everything their body is challenged with.
Yeah, hard to overstate that, John. That is a profound example of the human's ability to adapt to a certain point, right? Until the proverbial,
House of cards. Yeah,
bag.
house of cards comes down.
In the last 2 minutes, I know you have another commitment, John. Again, it's important to emphasize, and as Dr. Johnson has done in his research and others researches we've commented on, that while most of the fructose we get is external, we do have endogenous sources. Glucose can be converted to fructose. This is called the polyol pathway.
Mm.
Uh, and as we talked about, excess salt, chronic stress, ischemia, people with congestive heart failure or circulatory issues that simply cannot deliver enough oxygen, chronic obstructive lung disease. This will enhance the internal conversion of glucose to fructose. And if you are on a high glycemic standard American diet, as we've talked about, in addition to these other contributors, you will make fructose on top of what you're consuming. So it really is the perfect storm. And of course, the modern consequences of this we've talked about. And this is really the last slide, John, of just things that people can be thinking about in a way that they can mitigate these metabolic disruptors. And the first advice would be get your uric acid tested, John, because I'm amazed, as I know you are, that much like insulin or a HOMA score, physicians are not inclined to measure a uric acid unless you have symptoms of gout, or unless maybe you're a kidney stone former, as uric acid is in kidney stone. So again, it's that Western model where until you're sick and have a symptom where the red light goes off, there'll be very little interest in tracking a biomarker that has great significance for, as you mentioned, people who are largely asymptomatic.
It's not expensive, right, Mark?
No, it probably less than $20 to get a uric acid.
So it shouldn't be opposition.
Really inexpensive, readily available tests. And again, these are just strategies to turn off the switch. And we've touched on all of these. So by way of reviewing, just trying to obviously limit sugar and these high glycemic dietary sources, hydration, obviously very important, mitochondrial health, and we talk about this all the time. So regular aerobic and resistance activity, sunlight, all of those things. Certainly moderating carb to the extent of very low carb ketogenic diets have been shown to be profoundly and rapidly effective in reversing these metabolic disruptions. And then, as we'll talk about in the near future, focusing more on these high alkaline food sources, which our ancient ancestors so commonly consumed, high in potassium, high in magnesium, high in calcium. Nature has provided us with the sources that we need to thrive, and so I will stop there, John, and let you close with some comments.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it's a real easy component of someone's food choices to target for some of your greater metabolic returns to get healthier here in 2026. If there's, I don't like to always take the lens of restriction, avoidance. I know you and I talk about this. Like if we focus on just make sure we get more protein at every meal. I would say the same thing about what you just mentioned. Let's focus on getting more alkaline loaded foods. The first time, at first people need to understand what those are, and maybe you and I can talk soon about that to help them identify those. But there should be some good information online for people to look at that. But going back to one of the most important things, even though it's good to focus on what we need more of, because that's what our ancestors did as well. They needed to be nourished, and so they chose foods that offered the most nourishment. I would say that targeting fructose and saying, you know what, I might not be ready for a ketogenic diet. I might not be ready for a low carb diet, because some people, for one reason or another, Mark, and I know you found this as well, they're not quite there yet, and maybe they don't need to be. But the one thing that everybody can do is they can target fructose, they can target added sugars, refined carbohydrates, and still eat a modest amount of carbohydrates from good foods like sweet potatoes and root vegetables. And even potatoes have value at the end of the day compared to, so much of the food supply now is 30 to 40% refined sugar by weight. And I just think it's one of the easiest things for people to target. And for the next year ahead, like really support your health by cutting those things out or reducing them as dramatically as you can and replace them with the foods that our ancestors ate, which are rich in one or more nutrients. And again, I pick on the white potato a lot because it has minimal value compared to so many things, but at least it gives you 300 milligrams of potassium, right? At least it's not a burden on all of your system. It can raise your blood sugar level, sure, but it's so much better than the carbohydrates that people are, eating 4 or 5 times a day.
Yeah, this is a great way to sort of wind down 2025
Yeah.
and to shine some light on possibility as people look to 2026. Our lives are about possibility, and it's important to bring those mindsets into these more sort of scientific attributes that we focus on. Don't forget to love yourself. Don't forget to hang the judgment on the door. Love who you are. Be forgiving, and see each meal, each step, right? Each new moment is a new opportunity, and that's really I love that, the mindset that you inject into that concluding statement there, John. So always a pleasure. Great topic, great discussion.
I love you, brother. Thanks so much.
Love you as well, John. Happy New Year to you. Happy New Year to our Health Edge community. Check out our website, healthedgepodcast.com. Our podcast is on all the usual sort of media outlets. We do have a YouTube channel for those that like the visual and want to see these graphics. And again, the PowerPoint will be available on our website. So be well, everyone.
Happy New Year.